The great house of Duplain had one rule carved deeper than any other. A commoner did not touch a noble. To lift a hand against Duplain blood was to lose that hand. To strike a Duplain daughter in her own bedroom was to lose your head before nightfall. That was law across every corner of Ebelstein. So it made no sense at all, that on a quiet afternoon in the youngest daughter's chambers, a boy the household had known for less than a day drew back his open palm and slapped her across the face. Hard. He did it twice. He watched her stagger back against the tall glass of the window, with pink handprints blooming on her cheek. The two guards outside the door heard everything. They heard the sharp crack of skin on skin. They heard the young lady's small, startled cry. Yet no blade came free from any sheath. No boots hurried in. Neither man even turned his head to look. That was the first thing about him that did not add up. To understand the rest, someone would have to go back a few hours, to the morning the boy walked through the front gates of Duplain Castle with a single bag on his shoulder and a face too calm for what he was walking into. His name was Dererick. He was a commoner. He carried no family name worth writing down. He wore no crest sewn into his collar. His traveling coat had seen weather and been mended more than once. In a country where the color of your blood decided the shape of your whole life, he was, on paper, worth nothing at all. Yet the Duke of Duplain himself had sent for him. Word of his arrival spread through the servants' halls in low whispers. Maids passed the news along with the linens. A country boy, a hired tutor, for the youngest daughter, Della. Some of them laughed behind their aprons. Della had gone through 6 tutors already. The last had resigned in tears after a fortnight. Not one of them expected number 7 to last past supper. The head steward gave Derek his instructions in short, clipped lines. The girl was difficult. The girl was rude. Every noble test had said the same thing about her. She had no real gift for magic. That last part was said with a small, tight smile that told Derek everything about the girl's life inside her own home. Della Duplain was the failure of a house that did not accept failure. Derek nodded and asked nothing. Up the wide marble stairs he went alone. He passed a hallway lined with portraits of dead Duplains, each of them wrapped in ceremonial robes and painted mid-spell, mana curling around their fingers in soft golden lines. Through a long window he glimpsed the training grounds, where 2 young men with dark hair and stiff shoulders were dueling with practice staves. He did not stop to watch. He stopped in front of Della's door and knocked. No answer came. A second knock. This time the door swung open all on its own, pulled from the inside by a small hand. Della Duplain stood in the middle of her wide sunlit room, in a pale blue dress with a ribbon coming loose. She looked him up and down with the flat, bored gaze of a child who had been told her whole life that her displeasure was the only thing about her that mattered. Then she smiled. It was not a nice smile. A porcelain jug of dirty washwater sat on a low table beside her. She lifted it before he could set his bag down. She poured the whole thing over his head in one slow, steady stream. It ran down his hair and soaked his collar and dripped from his eyelashes. It smelled sour, like something a maid had used to scrub a floor. She waited to see what he would do. He set his bag down. He wiped his face once with the back of his hand. Her small foot swung out and caught him hard in the shin, right on the bone. She was small, but she meant it. She told him, quite calmly, that he could leave now if he wanted. She told him that all 7 of the tutors before him had left in the first hour, and she was already bored of him. Her shoulders squared, her back turned to make her point clear. She did not see his hand move. The slap turned her head. Her hip hit the low table, and she grabbed at the edge of it to keep from falling. She looked up at him with her mouth open. No sound filled the room for a full breath. Then he slapped her again. This one was lighter. It was almost polite. It was the kind of slap a tutor gave a student who had failed to answer a simple question. It was worse than the first. The message under it was worse still. Level and even, his voice named the trade. She had thrown the water and she had kicked him, and now they were even. From tomorrow she would rise at dawn and study with him. If she wanted to spit or scream or run to her father, she was welcome to try. Her father was the one who had signed him in. Della stared at him. Her cheek was pink. Her eyes were wet, though she was fighting it. She had never in 12 years of life been struck by anyone. Not her mother, not her father, not a servant, not a tutor. Nobles did not strike Duplain daughters. It simply did not happen. The door burst open behind her. Both of her brothers came through it in seconds. The dark-haired one, Riag, still had his practice stave in his hand. The blonde one, Valerian, taller and softer around the shoulders, came in second with a look of quiet horror. Riag saw the pink mark on his sister's face. He saw the water dripping from Derek's coat. He drew. Derek did not move. His hands stayed where they were. His face stayed calm. The calm of a man who had been told, before he ever entered this castle, exactly how far he was allowed to go. He offered one line. They should ask their father before they cut him. That was all. Riag froze. Valerian pulled his brother back by the elbow with a soft murmur. He knew that voice. That was the voice of a man who had already had a very specific conversation with the Duke. Valerian's eyes moved from the slap mark on his sister's cheek to the calm face of the tutor and back again. He did not say anything. He simply nodded once, took his sister by the shoulders, and led her out of the room to be seen to. Riag stayed a moment longer, breathing hard through his nose. Then he lowered his blade and left. The two guards outside had not moved. They still did not move. That was how the household of Duplain learned, in the space of a single morning, that Duke Raymond Oswald Duplain had brought a boy into his home and given him a permission slip written in blood. Whatever this commoner did to the youngest daughter, the father had already agreed to it. A question rippled through the servants' halls that afternoon. It was a simple one. What was the Duke seeing that no one else could see? For an answer, someone had to go further back than a single morning. Years back, down to a mountain village in the south, where a boy with no name and a very old man had once shared a small stone house at the top of a windy hill. Derek had been 8 years old. The old man had been a hedge mage. He lived alone in a house full of dusty books, herbs drying in bunches from the ceiling, and a single narrow bed under a leaking window. He had come to the village decades earlier and never left. Villagers thought him a harmless eccentric. They brought him small ailments to cure. They paid him in bread and eggs. They laughed at him behind his back. Derek had walked to that house alone one wet spring afternoon and knocked. In a small, quiet voice, he had told the old man that he wanted to be a mage. He had said it as if he was asking for a glass of water. For a long time, the old man had only looked at him. Then he had laughed, softly, and asked the boy if he understood what a commoner mage was in this country. He had asked if the boy understood that even the best commoner mage in the world would always sit below the worst noble mage. Nobles came out on top. That was the shape of the world. Derek had said he understood. Out came the old man's palm. He had placed a smooth gray stone in the boy's small hand. He had told him to try, just try, to warm the stone. He had not expected anything. The stone had glowed within seconds. For a long while the old man had only stared at the boy's small hand. He had lifted the stone, turned it over, set it down. Then he had asked the boy where his parents were, and the boy had told him. He had asked the boy why he had come alone. The boy had told him that too. He had asked the boy if he understood that the road he was asking to walk would end badly for a child like him, and the boy had said yes, and asked again if he could stay. The old man had let him stay. 4 years passed in that little stone house. The old man taught him the basics: mana flow, breath control, how to read the little sputtering sparks a young mage first drew into the world. The boy grew fast, too fast. By the end of the 2nd year, the old man had run out of things to teach him with the books he owned. By the end of the 3rd, the boy was pulling off small feats his teacher had not managed at his age, or any age since. Late at night, the old man began to sit up with a worried face. He would look at Derek, curled up asleep under the leaking window, and shake his head. Sometimes he muttered to himself that the boy's talent was going to get him killed. Sometimes he muttered that a country like this did not know what to do with a commoner who could burn brighter than the sons of dukes. Grimoires, he muttered, real ones, the kind he could not afford. Derek heard him some nights. He pretended to be asleep. Then, in the 4th spring, the old man went into town and did not come back for 2 days. When he came back with a book, a real grimoire, 2-star, bound in dark leather with a house crest pressed into the cover. He set it on the table between himself and Derek like a man setting down a stolen crown. Where he had got it, he did not say. What he had done for it, he did not say. He told the boy to read it. He told the boy to learn it. A week, no more. Derek opened the book. He did not sleep for 4 nights. He read the whole thing. On the 6th day, the men came for the old master. They came at dusk, 3 of them. Private guards of a lesser noble, 3 villages over. who had discovered his family's 2-star grimoire missing from a locked case. A rumor about a strange hedge mage and a bright child had led them here. Boots crossed the threshold without a knock. Hands took hold of the old man and dragged him out into the yard. Derek tried to stand between them. An arm swept across the boy's chest and shoved him hard, back into the doorway. The old man turned to the men and told them, calmly, that the theft had been his and his alone. He told them the boy had not known. He told them to take him. They took him. Not far. Only as far as the yard. From the doorway, Derek watched. Rain began while it was still going on. Cold spring rain, the kind that came down in slow, steady sheets. It fell on the old man's gray hair and darkened his shirt. It fell on the men doing the beating. It fell on the ground until the ground turned to mud, and then it fell on the old man again where he lay in the mud, and it did not stop. The men did not stop either. By the end of it, the old man was not moving. One of them wiped his hands on his coat and remarked that this was the price of ambition for someone born small. They pulled the grimoire out of the little stone house and left with it. Not one of them looked at the boy in the doorway. Derek walked out into the yard in the rain. He knelt in the mud beside his master. He put his hand on the old man's chest. The chest did not rise. The old man's eyes were open, staring up at the gray sky, empty of any expression at all. Blood thinned fast at the corner of his mouth. His fingers were curled loosely, the way a man's fingers curled when he had been holding something and let it go. Derek did not cry. He sat there for a long time in the rain. Somewhere behind his eyes, in a place he could not see and could not point to, something quiet clicked open. A pane of pale light unfolded before him, thin as glass and edged with symbols he did not know how to read. It hung in the air where no one else could have seen it. It waited. He did not understand what it was. He only understood that the world he was living in had killed the only person who had ever been kind to him, because that person had tried to give a poor child a book. That was the price. That was the rule. Nobles came out on top, his master had told him. His master had been right. He touched the pane of light with his fingertip. Words rearranged themselves across it in a soft, clean shape. The world he had known ended in that small movement, out in the mud, alone in the rain. Whatever the boy had been before, he was not that boy any longer. For a long time after they buried the old man, the boy did not speak. He dug the grave himself in a corner of the yard where the rain had softened the earth. The shovel was too big for his hands. His palms bled by the time the hole was deep enough. He rolled the old man in the wool blanket from the leaking bed and lowered him down with hands that shook and did not shake for reasons of cold. Above the fresh soil he placed the smooth gray stone from that first afternoon. Then he went back inside the little stone house. He packed what he could carry: 2 shirts, a worn cloak, a cooking pot, a book of first principles the old master had written in his own hand years before the theft that killed him. He took nothing else. He walked down the hill in the morning fog. The village did not ask where the old man had gone. Villagers had seen the noble guards leave with the book, and they had drawn their own conclusions. A boy with a bag on his shoulder passing through the square drew a few glances and no questions. That was how commoners were mourned in a country like this, quietly, without anyone bothering to notice. 4 years he was on the road after that. He slept in barns when farmers let him. He slept in ditches when they did not. He learned to skin rabbits with a small knife he had traded a book of herbs for. He read the master's notes by candle stubs and firelight until the pages softened at the corners. In one town he mucked out a stable for a week to earn a bowl of stew. In another he mended fences for a family who let him sit at their supper table and pretended not to hear his stomach. The pain of pale light stayed with him. It came when he called for it and folded away when he did not. It counted things. It measured things. It named his rank in small, clean symbols and told him where he stood against the rest of the world. According to that pain, at 8 years old, he had already stood at the edge of 1 star. By 10, he had crossed it. He kept that private. The master's death had taught him what noble ears did with news like his. By 12, he was working a rope of caravans as an errand runner and a pot scrubber. Merchants trusted a quiet child around their bags in a way they never trusted the older boys. He earned copper. He saved most of it. He bought his first real spellbook in a border town from a half-drunk peddler who did not know what he was selling. It was a low 1-star manual, cheap and battered. To Derek, it was a small, holy thing. He was 13 when Katya Flameheart found him. She found him by mistake. A caravan he was riding with had been ambushed on a mountain road by bandits, and the merchant had hired a passing mercenary company to run them off. She was in that company. Red-haired, tall in the saddle, with a burn scar down the side of her neck she never explained. 3-star mage. Fallen Viscount's daughter, though he did not learn that for months. She saw him standing over a dying bandit with a small charged spark in his palm, deciding whether to finish the man or spare him. She stopped her horse. For a long moment she did not speak. She only looked at the little boy and the fading spark and the color of the mana flowing under his skin. Then, in a voice more curious than warm, she asked him where he had learned to do that. He told her about the old man. She did not ask about the man's death. She only nodded once, as if she had heard many such stories, and asked whether he wanted a real teacher. She warned him she was not a kind one. She warned him the pay would be terrible for a long time. She warned him she would push him past the point where children broke. He said yes before she finished. 3 years he rode with her. She taught him mana efficiency until he could hold a spell in one hand while running full sprint with a pack on his back. She taught him structure. She taught him the shape of a mage's inner core and how to widen it slowly, over months, without cracking it. Most of all, she taught him what the old master had never lived long enough to teach. She taught him how to fight another mage and win. Feints. Openings. When to burn everything at once, and when to wait. By the middle of the 2nd year, the pain was reading him as 2-star. He did not tell her. She noticed anyway. One evening by a low campfire, she poured him a mug of the terrible black tea she liked, and told him, without looking up, that she was going to leave him within the year. He had already outgrown what she could pass on. A count in the northern provinces had offered her a permanent post, and she was going to take it. She would write. He did not argue. He watched the fire. Later, he would remember that night as the moment he understood he could not lean on any one person in this world for very long. Teachers ended. Mothers of a kind ended. What did not end was the pain and the work. She left him in a large port town called Ebelstein, a month before his 16th birthday. She gave him a letter of introduction to a mercenary tavern owner she had once bled beside on a raid. She gave him her best cloak. She rode north on a gray horse without looking back. Derek walked to the tavern. The place was called the Broken Hare. It sat on a crooked side street 2 blocks off the main square, a squat building of dark wood with a scarred oak door. Inside, the light was low. Sawdust covered the floor. A one-eyed woman with a bow across her back leaned against the bar and eyed the boy as he came in. That was Peeline. She was the archer of the house. Behind the bar stood Jaden. He was a big man with gray creeping into his beard and a laugh that came out of him like a bark. Both his arms worked in those days. He read Katya's letter with a small crease between his brows and then folded it and slipped it under the bar and looked the boy up and down and told him he was hired. He did not ask his rank. Katya's letter had said enough. For the first month, the work was small. Sewer clearing, guard duty on merchant carts, chasing a runaway pig through a rich man's back garden. Derek did every job without complaint. He handed his cut back to Jaden most evenings for a bowl of hot stew and a straw bunk in the back room. Peeline started calling him Little Fire. It was, he thought later, the first nickname anyone had given him that did not sting. Then, on a gray morning at the end of that month, a hooded woman walked into the Broken Hare and asked for a mage. She kept her face down. Her cloak was fine wool, the kind commoners did not wear. Her boots had never seen a real road. Jaden's smile went quiet, the way it went quiet only around trouble. She wanted a job. Goblin extermination. A small nest in the woods north of the city was killing hunters. She wanted the fastest mage in the house. Jaden pointed at Derek. The woman looked over. What little he could see of her face under the hood was young. Her mouth was drawn. A gold pin at her collar carried a house crest he did not recognize by sight, but knew by shape. Duplain. He did not say so. They rode out together, only the two of them, on a pair of borrowed horses. She did not speak much on the road. He did not press her. In the woods, an hour past the second stream, they found the goblin nest in a shallow gully under a fallen tree. There were 20 of them. He killed them all in under a minute. He did it with a pattern of small charged sparks arranged in a spiral, released one after another, the way the old master had once shown him with pebbles on a still pond. The goblins died before they had risen from their sleep. He walked through the mess afterwards and made sure. There were no children among them. He had checked for that first. He turned around and the hooded woman was staring at him from the top of the gully. Her hood had slipped back. She was very beautiful. Long silver hair, pale eyes, a face the whole capital would have known on sight if the whole capital had been standing there beside her. This was Iseline Duplain, the flower of Duplain, the oldest daughter. He had never seen her painted portrait, but he did not need to. Her expression alone was enough. She had not expected a 2-star pattern from a mercenary boy. She did not thank him. She simply asked him, in a small, careful voice, whether he would be willing to come to Duplain Castle. There was a matter, she said, of a private tutor. Her father was looking. Her sister, she said, had been declared without talent. He asked her father's name, she told him. He said he would come. That was the road that had brought him, less than 2 weeks later, through the front gates of Duplain Castle, with a single bag on his shoulder and a face too calm for what he was walking into. That was the road that had led to the wash water and the shin kick and the 2 slaps and the 2 brothers coming through the door. And now the household stood on the other side of that morning and did not know what to make of any of it. They found out something else that same evening. The Duke sent for Derek after supper. Duke Raymond Oswald Duplain received him in a study lined with dark shelves and quiet lamps. The Duke was a tall, lean man in a dark green coat, hair going silver at the temples, eyes the color of cold water. He did not rise when Derek entered. He gestured to a chair opposite his desk. He watched the boy sit down. For a long moment he only looked at him. Then, in a voice as level as a table, he asked what rank his new tutor truly was. Derek said 1 star. The Duke's mouth moved a fraction. It was not a smile. It was the small motion of a man who had just heard a lie he had already known was coming, and was politely allowing his opponent to keep it. The Duke asked the same question a second time. Derek said 1 star again. The Duke set down the small silver pen he had been holding. He remarked, mildly, that he had commanded battalions for 30 years, and had known 1-star mages and 2-star mages, and a small number of 3-star mages personally. His tutor, he said, moved in the mana around him in a way 1-stars did not. He was not going to press the point. He only wanted his tutor to know he had noticed. Derek held his eyes. He said quietly that he was 1 star for the purpose of this contract. The Duke inclined his head. That, it seemed, was acceptable. What was less acceptable was his daughter. He wanted to know how his tutor planned to teach a girl every noble tester had declared magically empty. Derek told him he did not yet know. He would know by the end of the week. The Duke poured 2 small glasses of a dark amber wine and slid one across the desk. He said, without warmth, that he had authorized every step of the incident that afternoon, up to and including the 2 slaps. His daughter had needed it. His household had needed it. He would not permit permanent harm. Short of that, the tutor had a free hand. Derek nodded once. Before he left the study, the Duke said one more thing. He said the boy reminded him of someone. He did not say who. He waved him out. Della was already asleep when he passed her door. He did not sleep much himself. He sat by the window of the small tutor's room they had given him and thought about the paintings he had seen down the hallway on his way in. Not the portraits of the dead Duplains. The smaller ones. The framed things hung low near a nursery door, faded from years of southern sun, children's paintings. He had glanced at them on the way past and not stopped. Something in his memory turned them over now. A forest. Always a forest. Every one of them. Trees drawn in a small child's careful hand. Roots painted thicker than the trees they belonged to. As if the child had understood, without being told, that a tree was mostly the parts you could not see. Small animals in every corner. A pond at the middle of one painting with a ring of frost around it that did not belong to any season a child in the capital would have known by sight. He sat with that a long time. In the morning he asked Valerian, the softer of the 2 brothers, whether he could see his sister's old rooms in the nursery wing. Valerian, who had spent the whole previous evening quietly deciding he liked this odd tutor, took him up personally. The room was closed. Dust lay along the sills. On the walls, framed at a child's height, hung the paintings. Derek studied them one at a time. A stack of small books sat on a low shelf. He knelt and lifted them. Old primers. Beginner's texts. Not the ones a Duplain child would be given, all fine leather and gold script. Cheap ones. Books that dealt with mana as something that lived in growing things. Wild school primers. Someone had smuggled them into the nursery of a Duplain daughter years ago and no one had thought to remove them. He rose slowly. Something in his mouth wanted to laugh. He did not let it. Della was not empty. She was a wild school mage. A jungle school mage, some called it. The old branch of magic that had grown up out of villages and forests before the noble academies had put a wall around what magic was supposed to be. It ran through instinct and living things. It did not answer to the tests noble houses used. Every tester who had ever passed his hand over Della Duplain and pronounced her hollow had been holding the wrong instrument. He turned to Valerian and asked whether Della had ever been alone in a real forest. Valerian said no. Never. Their mother did not allow it. Derek asked whether the north forest of the estate had wolves. Valerian said it had, once, but that had been years ago. Derek thanked him and walked out. That night he took Della into the north forest. He did it carefully. He told her, in the calmest voice he had, that they were going out for a lesson. She scowled at him. She still had a small bruise at the corner of her mouth from the previous day. She followed him anyway, because a Duplain daughter who had been slapped twice and had no one come running knew, on some level she had not yet named, that this was not a house rule she could break with a scream. They walked deep, past the tree line, past the little painted markers her brothers had left as children. The moon was thin, the undergrowth was black. Halfway in, he told her to stop. He told her he was going to kill her. He said it flatly. He did not raise his hand. He did not smile. He told her that a Duplain daughter with no magic and no future was, in the end, a burden to her house, and he had been asked to solve the burden. He said her father had signed the order. He said her mother had agreed. None of it was true. Della's face went white. He drew a small charged spark to the palm of his hand. He let her see it. He watched her step back into the roots of an old tree. He watched her chest move fast under the pale nightgown they had let her wear out. He watched the exact moment her small, proud, noble face fell away and left behind a child who was about to die and did not know why. He stepped forward. Della's hand shot out. Frost bloomed in a jagged arc across the ground between them. It ran up the trunk of the old tree at her back. It splintered the low bushes on his side. The air went sharp and cold in a full circle around her. Ice climbed her fingers. Ice sat white in her hair. Her eyes were huge and full of tears and rage and something older than either. She had cast 1-star ice magic, untaught, unprompted, direct from the roots up. He let the spark in his palm die. He knelt down, slowly, so she could see him do it. He told her, in a voice much gentler than the one he had used a minute earlier, that no one was going to kill her tonight. He told her he was sorry. He told her he had needed her to be frightened enough to reach for something she had never been taught to reach for. He told her that what had just come out of her hand was hers. It had always been hers. Every tester who had told her it was not there had been wrong. Della sat down in the frost and cried. He sat down with her. He did not touch her. He waited. When her breathing evened out, he told her the truth about the paintings. He told her about the wild school. He told her that most nobles did not know it still existed, and the ones who did looked down on it. He told her, quietly, that if she wanted, he would teach it to her. It would be hard. It would not look like the magic her brothers did. It would be hers. Della nodded once. Her small chin trembled and set. They walked back through the frost. He carried her cloak for her. The next morning, when the household woke, the youngest daughter of Duplain was already up. She was in the small garden behind the kitchens with her tutor. She was learning to sit still with her hand on the trunk of an apple tree and to feel where the tree's mana ran and where hers might one day meet it. Riag, watching from an upstairs window, could not make sense of what he was seeing. Valerian, watching from a lower one, smiled slowly to himself. The Duchess came home 3 days later. Her name was Mela Duplain. The household called her, quietly, the goddess of wrath. She was a small woman with a hard mouth and a beauty that had never softened with age. Her carriage rolled through the front gates in the middle of the afternoon, and her staff started running before the wheels had stopped turning. She heard about the commoner tutor before she was out of her traveling coat. She heard about the washwater. She heard about the shin. She heard about the 2 slaps. Her hand tightened on the arm of the maid delivering the news. She did not scream. She did not need to. She walked, in her traveling coat still, straight through the main hall and up the wide marble stairs, and down the corridor to the small garden, where her daughter was sitting with her hand on an apple tree. She saw Della, she saw Derek. She crossed the garden in 10 steps. Her palm caught Derek across the cheek before he had fully risen from his bow. The sound of it carried all the way to the kitchens. Derek did not move. He straightened slowly out of his half-bow, with a red print already rising on his cheek. He kept his hands at his sides. He did not touch the mark. He did not look at Mela's face. He looked, quietly, at Della. Della had gone still on the low garden bench. Her small hand was still resting on the trunk of the apple tree, the way he had taught her the night before. Her eyes moved from her mother to her tutor and back again. Something inside her 12-year-old face reshaped itself in silence. It was not the face of a child anymore. Not quite. Mela drew back for a second strike. She did not land it. A hand caught her wrist from behind. Not roughly, firmly. The Duke had arrived home an hour earlier and been told, and had come out to the garden without changing his riding coat. He held his wife's wrist at the level of her shoulder and did not raise his voice. He asked her, in a quiet, even tone, whether she had just struck the man he had personally hired. Mela's face colored. She began to answer. She began to remind him that he had brought a commoner into their home and set that commoner over their daughter and given him a permission slip a duchess had not been consulted on. Her voice climbed. The Duke's palm caught her across the cheek before her voice reached its highest point. Not hard. Hard enough. The garden went silent. Every servant within sight lowered their eyes to the paving stones. Mela's hand came up slowly to touch her own face. Her eyes went wide and stayed wide. The Duke released her wrist. He stepped past her. He turned to Derek and bowed his head a small, careful degree. He apologized. He apologized in the clear voice of a man who intended every witness in the garden to hear him. He apologized for his wife. He apologized for his house. He said that his tutor had been struck in his home while carrying out work the Duke himself had ordered, and this would not be permitted to stand. He turned back to his wife. He told her, in the same clear voice, that she would present herself in his study within the hour. He told her that the boy at the apple tree was not to be spoken to again, unless she wished to speak to a tutor. He told her that if she required her authority in the household restored, she could earn it back. Mela did not answer. She turned and walked away across the garden with her back very straight and her steps a little too quick. The Duke watched her go. Then he crossed to the bench and knelt in front of his daughter. He put a hand on Della's small shoulder. He asked her, softly, whether the tree lesson was working. Della nodded. The Duke smiled. It was a small smile, tired at the edges. He rose. He walked past Derek and paused a step behind him and told him, without looking back, that he would find 3-star grimoires waiting for him in the West Library that evening. He said nothing else. He left the garden. Derek stood in the sun a while. Della, on the bench, put her hand back on the trunk of the apple tree. News of the double slap reached every corner of Duplain Castle by supper. The way it was told in the servants' halls varied. In the kitchens they told it as a comedy, with the Duchess as the fool and the Duke as the punchline. In the maids' quarters they told it as a warning, and the youngest maids repeated it to one another in low voices before bed. In the guardhouse they told it flatly, as men who had once served under Raymond Oswald Duplain on a border war and knew what he was capable of when his word had been broken in his own house. In one small tutor's room above the west wing, Derek sat by candlelight and read. 3 grimoires lay open on the desk in front of him, real 3-star texts, bound in a dark leather he had seen only once before in his life, the night the old man had died for one. He read them slowly. He read them the way another boy might have eaten a first hot meal after a long famine. He read past midnight. He read past the second bell. Somewhere near dawn he closed the last one and put his forehead down on the desk for a full minute without moving. Then he got up and went to teach Della. The next weeks changed the household from the inside. Della rose at dawn every day now. She did not complain. She sat with her tutor in the small garden and learned to feel mana in living things. Apple trees, a rose bush, a pond with tadpoles. She learned to hold a spark for a full minute without letting it drop. She learned, on a rainy afternoon, to draw a thin ribbon of frost along the surface of a puddle without breaking her breath. She also learned to say please and thank you. The second was Derek's doing, and it was a longer campaign than any of the magic. He worked on the manners first. He worked on them harder than he worked on the spells. He explained to her on a slow walk around the training field that a wild school mage in a noble house had two problems. The first was people not seeing her magic. The second was people not seeing her at all. He said that the second problem would kill the first if she did not solve it. He said that if her own maids feared her, her own family would too, and no amount of ice on a puddle would fix that. Della listened. She did not always agree. She glowered often. Once she stamped her foot in her old way and told him she did not need to be polite to a girl who was going to change her sheets. He looked at her steadily until she looked away. He said quietly that the girl changing her sheets could tell her something one day that would save her life, and would not, if Della had made herself the kind of mistress a servant did not speak to. Della thought about that for a long time. The next morning she said thank you when the tea was brought. The maid who brought it nearly dropped the cup. By the end of the first month, 3 separate maids had come to the head steward in tears, asking whether something was wrong with the youngest lady. She had been kind. She had asked one of them, by name, how her mother was healing from a winter cough. She had returned a hairpin to another that she had once thrown across the room. The steward, who had been in the house 40 years, sat down at his desk and stared at nothing for a while. Mela heard about all of it. She did not speak to Derek. She did not speak to Della either. She kept to the east wing. She took her meals in her private sitting room. From time to time, one of her maids would catch her standing at a window watching her daughter cross a courtyard with the tutor, and would see, on her hard mouth, an expression that had never sat there before. It looked, faintly, like confusion. It looked, more faintly, like something the goddess of wrath had not felt in 20 years. Riag noticed too. Riag was 14. He was the middle child. He was the one who had drawn his blade in Della's doorway that first morning. He was the one who had lowered it. He had not lowered his opinion. He watched his little sister through the second and third weeks with a face that grew steadily unhappier. He watched her leave the house at dawn. He watched her come back with grass stains on her skirts. He watched her, once, standing on the training field with a small ribbon of frost, turning slowly between her palms, while the tutor stood a step behind her and said nothing. Something in Rag Duplain did not like it. He was not stupid. He knew, later, when he was older, that what he had not liked was the fact of his sister growing without him. He had spent his childhood being the second son of Duplain, which meant being seen mostly against the shape of his brother Valerian, who was the heir. He had a younger sister who could not do magic. That, at least, had been his to protect. It had been his shape. A brother of a hollow sister. His sister was not hollow anymore. He asked for a duel. He asked for it formally, at supper, in front of the whole family. He rose from his seat with a small, stiff bow to his father. He said that his sister had reportedly begun to cast, and he wished to test it in the way of the house, and if she could not stand against him under Kelbram Hall rules, he wished her expelled from the family register as a favor to the name. Mela set down her fork. The Duke did not answer at once. He looked, first, at his daughter. Della's chin came up. She said yes. She said it in a small, clear voice with no shake in it at all. She said she would duel Riag. She said she would do it under Kelbram Hall rules. She said she would do it in the training ring at the north end of the estate at noon in 3 days' time. The Duke inclined his head. Valerian, sitting between them, closed his eyes for one long breath. He did not look happy. He looked like an older brother who could see, already, that whichever child lost this fight was going to lose something more than a duel. That night, Derek sat with Della on the low wall of the training ring. He did not tell her that she could win. He did not lie to her about her rank. He told her, instead, exactly what she was facing. Riag was a solid 2-star mage of the standard school. He would open with fire. He would try to end it fast because a 2-star fireball against a 1-star ice mage was almost certainly enough to trigger her protective barrier in a single strike, and first barrier triggered was the loss. Della listened. He said that the only way she was going to survive the first exchange was to not be where she was standing. He said that the only way she was going to win was to make Riag chase her into a place where his standard school did not know how to answer. He said one more thing. He said that under Kelbram Hall rules, stepping off the platform lost the duel, but going under it did not. Della blinked at him slowly. She asked what he meant. He drew, in the dust of the training ring, a small diagram. A raised wooden platform. A gap of maybe a hand's width under one edge, where where the boards did not quite meet the stone base. He said that a wild school ice mage did not, strictly speaking, need to be standing on the platform to cast into it. She only needed to be in contact with something that connected to it. Living things, water, the ground the platform sat on. She stared at the diagram. She asked whether it was allowed. He said the rules did not forbid it. She thought about that a long time, then she smiled. It was not the small mean smile she had smiled once over a jug of dirty water. It was a slower thing. It looked, faintly, like her father's. The duel was held at noon. The training ring had been dressed for the occasion. A raised wooden platform stood at the center, under a pale spring sun. The wooden boards had been polished. Chalk lines marked the fighting square. A dozen chairs had been set at the edge for the household. The Duke sat in the center chair with his hands folded on his knee. Valerian sat to his right. Mela sat, for the first time in weeks, at his left. Her face was very still. Servants stood back at a respectful distance in a low crowd of gray and white uniforms. Riag came out first. He wore his training coat and a red sash for house colors. He carried no wand. He did not need one at 2-star. He climbed onto the platform and bowed to his father and took his mark on the far chalk line. Della came out second. She wore a plain gray dress. She had put her hair up herself. She had refused a wand and a sash. She crossed the training ring on her own 2 small feet with her tutor, a respectful 3 paces behind her. He did not step onto the platform. He stopped at the edge of it. He gave her a small nod. She climbed up. She took her mark opposite her brother. She looked very small. The judge, a household elder, raised his hand. He named the rules. First protective barrier triggered would end the duel. No lethal strikes. No lasting harm. Stepping off the platform would forfeit. Any use of banned techniques would forfeit. He dropped his hand. Riag opened with fire. It was fast, cleanly cast, and enormous. A ball of 2-star flame the size of a wagon wheel came off his palm and crossed the platform in less than a heartbeat. It ate the air as it came. It threw the shadow of the wooden boards forward in a hard black line. Della did not stand still to meet it. She had already dropped, on the count of the judge's hand, into a small tight roll to her left, off the edge of the platform, down the short distance to the base stone below. The fireball passed over the space where she had been standing. The crowd made a sound, not a cheer, not a gasp, something in between. Half the servants had thought, in the instant she moved, that she had forfeited. The other half were not sure what they had just seen. Riag stared. He looked at the edge of the platform where his sister had gone. He looked at the judge. The judge, who had watched carefully, did not raise a hand to end the duel. She had not stepped off the platform. She had rolled. Kelbram Hall rules named the step. They did not name the roll. Riag's mouth thinned. He crossed to the edge of the platform to look down. He did not see her. He saw, instead, a thin white line of frost crawling up the leg of the platform on the far side. He saw, at the base of the platform, a small handprint pressed to the stone. Then another. Then a spread of pale white across the underside of the boards, where the gap between wood and stone met. He understood, very slowly, that she had crawled under the platform. His mouth opened to call foul. Ice came up through the boards. It came up not as a wall or a spear, but as a bloom. Thin white spikes climbed the underside of the platform in a slow, steady grid, one after another, driven up through the seams of the polished wood by a small hand pressed flat to the stone below. The boards creaked. The chalk line at Riag's feet whitened. The polished surface fogged. Riag stepped back. He stepped back onto the next board. That board bloomed too. The crowd made the sound again. Louder this time. Riag understood what she was doing. She was not trying to hit him. She was trying to make the platform hers. Every board she froze became an extension of the wild school mage under it. Every board she froze narrowed the space where he could safely stand. He countered. He came down with a full open palm and burned a 2-star ring of fire into the wood in a wide arc around him. Steam rose in a white cloud where the ice met the fire. The frost drew back a step. Wood hissed. Under the platform, Della gasped. Derek could hear it from where he stood. He did not move. Riag pressed. He walked the ring of fire slowly outward, burning each board as he went, trying to reach the edge of the platform. If he could stand at the edge, he could aim a shot down into the gap and force her out. Della let him come. She had not been idle. While Riag walked his ring of fire, She had reached her small hand up through a seam in the boards, at the very center of the platform, behind him. Her fingers were slim enough to fit. She had not tried to strike him. She had grown a thin, almost invisible ridge of ice up out of the seam, in the shape of a low bar. Riag, walking backward with his palms still glowing, caught his heel on it. He fell. He fell not off the platform, but flat on his back on top of it. His fire flickered and died in his palm, as instinct pulled his hands up to catch himself. His shoulders hit the polished wood. Ice bloomed under his coat in a single sharp bloom. Not spikes, not a strike. A cold, hard smack of pressure, driven straight up through the boards into his back, in the exact spot where the household mages set the barrier trigger to read a heavy blow. His protective barrier lit. A soft white shell of light snapped up around him in a full sphere and hung there in the sun for one bright second, before setting into the 10-minute lockout every noble child in the country had seen at least once. The judge raised his hand. The duel was over. The training ring was very quiet. Riag lay flat on his back inside a shell of light with a dying ring of scorch marks around him. Della crawled out from under the platform slowly on her hands and knees. Her gray dress was streaked with frost and grime. Her hair had come loose. One of her small palms was bleeding where a splinter had gone in. She stood up beside the platform. She had lost. Under Kelbram Hall rules, first barrier triggered was the loss, and the judge had already named it. Riag's barrier had lit last, but Della's own barrier had lit 2 beats earlier, when the edge of Riag's fire ring had brushed her side through the boards. She had not felt it at the time. The judge had. Riag's protective shell had come up only in reaction. She had cast 1-star ice magic in a duel, in public, against a 2-star mage of the standard school. She had made him fall on his own platform. The judge named Riag the winner in a slow, measured voice. He also named the duel a draw of honor. The crowd did not know what to do. Then Valerian stood up out of his chair and began to clap, slowly, steadily. Alone, at first, he clapped for his sister. He clapped for the small gray figure beside the platform with a splinter in her palm. He clapped until the Duke rose beside him and began to clap too. He clapped until the household caught it, one hand at a time, until the whole ring of servants and guards and elders was clapping for the youngest daughter of Duplain, who had, in the eyes of every noble tester in the country, been declared empty at the age of 6. Mela did not clap. Mela sat in her chair with both hands folded very tightly in her lap and looked at her daughter as if she had never seen her before. Della walked over to the platform. She climbed up, slowly. She crossed to where her brother lay inside his soft white shell. The barrier's lockout did not let him rise. He looked up at her from the boards. His mouth was tight. His eyes were wet at the corners in a way Riag Duplain had probably not allowed since he was small. Della knelt down beside the shell. She put her small hand flat against the light of the barrier. She did not speak for a moment. Then, in a small, clear voice the whole ring could hear, she thanked him for the duel. She thanked him for taking her seriously enough to ask for one. She said she loved him. She said she was sorry she had frozen his coat. She stood up. She walked back down off the platform. She walked to where her tutor stood at the edge of the ring. She did not run. She did not throw her arms around him. She stopped a proper pace in front of him and bowed the small formal bow of a student to a teacher. She held it for a full 2 seconds. Then she straightened. She smiled at him. Derek did not smile back. Not exactly. Something at the corner of his mouth moved a fraction. He inclined his head. Behind them, on the platform, Riag lay inside his shell of light and stared up at the sky and did not, for a long minute, know what to do with his face. The Duke stood at the edge of his chair for a long moment after the applause died. He watched his youngest daughter walk back down off the platform in her stained gray dress. He watched her stop in front of her tutor and bow. He watched the small movement at the corner of the tutor's mouth. He sat down slowly. Beside him, Mela's hands were still folded in her lap, very tightly. Her knuckles had gone white. She did not speak for the rest of the afternoon. That evening, the Duke called for Derek again. The West Library was a long room lined with dark shelves and standing lamps. The Duke was already there when Derek arrived. He was seated at a small reading table with 3 unbound leather cases stacked in front of him. He did not rise. He gestured to the chair opposite him. Derek sat. The Duke opened the first case. Inside lay a grimoire, dark leather, a house crest pressed into the cover. 3 stars marked at the spine in small silver dots. The Duke turned the case toward Derek. He said the tutor was welcome to it. Derek did not reach for it. He looked at the book the way a starving man looked at bread through a bakery window. He did not touch it. He looked at the Duke instead. The Duke smiled the small, tired smile. He said he was going to be honest with his tutor. He said he had not brought a commoner into his house for the sake of one small daughter. He said he had brought him because he had needed to see a certain thing done, and had not been sure a noble hand could do it. His hand had opened Della. That was payment enough for the contract as written. The grimoires were something else. He said his tutor had ambition. He said he had seen it the first evening across a desk in his study. He said he had seen it a second time, less certainly, in his tutor's steady voice under his wife's palm. He said he had seen it a third time when the tutor had drawn a diagram in the dust of a training ring and shown a 12-year-old girl how to turn a losing duel into a story her house would tell for a long time. He said that ambition, in a commoner, was rarer than talent. He said it was also more dangerous. He said he was gambling that his tutor's ambition would not, in the end, work against Duplain interests. He said the grimoires were his way of buying the first years of that gamble. Read them, learn from them, do not steal them. Return them, one at a time, when he had finished each. Derek sat with his hands on his knees. He asked, quietly, why the Duke was doing this. The Duke closed the case. He said his own father had been a small, ambitious man of a middling house, who had died of a fever 3 winters into a very cold campaign. He said his own father had left him a good name and a bad debt, and a small piece of advice that had shaped him. The advice had been that most men who claimed to want power wanted only to be safe. A very few, the old man had said, wanted the work. Not the seat, the work. He said that when he had looked across his study desk at a boy who told him he was 1 star when he was 2 star, and did not look away, he had thought of that advice for the first time in 30 years. He slid the case across. Derek took it. He bowed his head. They did not speak for a while. The Duke poured 2 small glasses of the dark amber wine, and pushed one over. This time Derek drank. Before he left the library, the Duke said one more thing. He said the tutor should not stay much longer in this house. He said it kindly. He said his daughter had grown. He said she would grow further. He said a wild school mage did not need a 2-star teacher for very much longer, and if her teacher stayed, either the teacher would begin to hold her back to keep the contract, which the Duke would notice and dislike, or the household would begin to grow used to a commoner in its private rooms, which the Duke would also notice and dislike for a different reason. He said his tutor should think, in the next weeks, about where he wanted to go next. He said the contract would be paid in full. He said the grimoires were, and would remain, a gift. Derek walked out of the library holding the case against his chest. The 2 months after the duel were the quietest of his life so far. Della grew. She did it in a way that surprised even her tutor. She held a full spark for 2 minutes now without breathing hard. She read the beginner's texts he had brought her from a bookseller in the town, and then she read them again. She wrote out mana diagrams in a small, careful hand and left them on his desk in the evenings for correction. She learned to walk into a room and greet the servants by name. She also learned to lose. That was the harder lesson. He had made her lose at everything he could think of. Little board games in the evenings. Mana control drills against his own steady hand. Small races through the kitchen garden with the cook's son. She had hated it at first. She had thrown a cup once. He had told her, without heat, that the cup had done nothing wrong, and she had gone to bed early in shame. She had, over the weeks, learned to lose without throwing things. Mela watched from her east wing. She did not come out much. She did not send for her daughter. Her maids reported, in low voices, that she often stood at her window in the mornings and watched the small gray figure crossing the courtyard for the tutor's lesson. Once she asked, on a rainy afternoon, whether her daughter had eaten. She had not asked such a question in 5 years. One morning she came down to breakfast. Della was already at the table. Della rose from her chair when her mother entered and bowed the small formal bow of a daughter to a lady of the house. She did it neatly. She kept her chin up. She held it for the right number of seconds and straightened. Mela sat down slowly. She did not speak for the first quarter of the meal. At the end of it, she asked her daughter, in a small, careful voice, whether the ice was still coming easily. Della said, "Yes, mother." Mela nodded once. She said that was good. That was all. Della did not cry until she was back in her own room with the door closed. Then she cried for a long time in a way that had nothing to do with sadness. Rieg came to Derek's room on a Tuesday evening in the second month. He came alone. He had not been invited. He knocked twice, waited, and stepped in when Derek opened the door. He stood in the middle of the small tutor's room for a while as if trying to decide where to put his hands. He looked at the desk. He looked at the 3 grimoires stacked at one corner of it. He looked out the window at the dark training ring. He said he had come to apologize. Derek offered him the chair. Rieg did not sit. Rieg said he had spent most of his life thinking of his sister as a shape rather than a person. He said the shape had suited him. He said he had not known that until she was standing on a platform in a gray dress with frost in her hair, and he had realized, lying on his back inside a barrier shell, that he did not know how she took her tea. He said he had drawn his sword in her doorway on Derek's first morning. He said he had been wrong. He said he was sorry. Derek did not answer at once. He said, quietly, that a brother who could stand in a small tutor's room and say those words to a commoner was a brother worth having. Rieg looked at him. He said that in the language of the house that was a very high compliment. He said thank you. He walked out. Derek sat down at his desk after the door closed and did not open a book for a while. He left the Duplain estate 3 weeks later. He left in the early morning. He left with his single bag on his shoulder and one of the 3 grimoires under his arm. The Duke had signed the release papers the previous evening in the West Library and had shaken his hand across the desk. Mela had not come down. Valerian saw him off at the front steps. Valerian had, in the last month, sewn Della a small cloth doll with silver thread hair and a tiny blue dress. He had presented it to her in the garden with a look of terrifying sincerity. Della had accepted it and named it after their grandmother and kept it on her pillow. Valerian had been very pleased with himself for several days. Now Valerian stood at the top of the steps in the early sun, with his hands folded in front of him, and told Derek, quite seriously, that he was welcome back at any hour of any day for the rest of his life. He said it in the voice of a soft older brother who had watched his little sister become a real person and had noticed who had done the work. Derek bowed to him. Della came down last. She was dressed in a proper traveling coat and boots because she had insisted on standing on the drive to see her tutor off, and Valerian had agreed with her, and no one in the house had the appetite to say no. She held her cloth doll in one hand and a small folded paper in the other. She stopped in front of Derek at the bottom of the steps. She looked up at him. She held out the paper. She said it was a mana diagram, her own, of frost through wood. She said she wanted him to have it. She said she had checked it 3 times, and he did not need to correct it. He took it. He did not open it. He knelt down in front of her the way he had knelt in the North Forest on the night of the fake execution. He put his hand on the top of her head. He did not tell her to be brave. He did not tell her to work hard. He told her, softly, that she did not need to grow up as fast as she had. He told her he was proud of her. He said it once. He stood up. Della did not cry. She stood on the drive with her small chin up and watched the tutor walk down the long gravel road to the front gate of Duplain Castle, with a bag on his shoulder and a grimoire under one arm. She stood there long after the front gate had closed. Valerian came down and put an arm around her shoulders in the end and turned her, gently, back toward the house. Derek did not look back. He walked the road to Ebelstein alone in the early sun. He reached the Broken Hare by mid-afternoon. Jaden was behind the bar. Paline was cleaning arrows at a table. Jaden looked up as the door opened and did not say anything for a moment. Then he barked his laugh and reached for a mug and told the boy to sit down. Derek sat. He drank the beer. He ate the stew. He listened, without speaking much, to the noise of a mercenary tavern in the middle of the afternoon. It sounded, to his own surprise, like home. Paline slid onto the bench beside him after a while. She did not ask about the Duplain contract. She only bumped his shoulder with hers and told him Little Fire had come back a bit taller. He almost smiled. He rented his old straw bunk in the back room and set his bag down. He set the grimoire on the small shelf above the bunk. He set the folded paper diagram beside it. He went out that evening to a quiet stretch of low hills outside the city. He tried to cast 3-star fire. He failed. The mana came. The pattern held. The shape was right. At the point of release, the whole structure collapsed inside his chest with a small hot flare that left him kneeling on the grass with sweat down his back. He tried again an hour later. He failed again. He tried a third time as the moon rose. He failed a third time. He sat on the hillside for a long while. He did not curse. He did not throw the grimoire. He simply understood, quietly, that the wall between 2-star and 3-star was a real wall, and that his talent alone was not going to go through it. Something else would be needed. He walked back to the tavern in the dark. The job came in the next morning. Jaden slid a folded letter across the bar without a word. It carried a house crest Derek did not know by sight. He opened it. It was from the Marquis of Belmiard. The Marquis wrote that his second daughter, Alente, was preparing for a duel of great personal importance and required a live sparring partner of a specific description. A 2-star mage, a commoner, a hard hand. The pay was excellent. The duration would be short. The letter, in its final line, mentioned that his daughter had heard reports of a certain tutor who had recently left Duplain's service and had been very insistent that this tutor be the sparring partner and no other. Derek read the letter twice. He asked Jaden what he knew about Alente Belmiard. Jaden set down the mug he had been drying. He said Alente Belmiard was 17. He said Alente Belmiard was a 2-star mage of the fire school. He said Alente Belmiard was one of the 3 jewels of the Rosa Salon in Ebelstein, along with Iseline Duplain and Denise Veltis, and she had spent the last 4 years of her life trying to become better than Iseline Duplain and failing at it in public, in a way the whole capital had watched. Jaden said the duel of great personal importance was almost certainly against Iseline. Derek sat with that for a moment. He asked Jaden whether he thought he should take it. Jaden barked his laugh. He said the boy was going to take it whether he asked or not, and both of them knew that already, and could he please stop asking questions to which he had already made up his mind, because Jaden had a bar to run. Derek smiled. He wrote the reply that afternoon. He rode out for Belmiard Manor the next morning at first light with his bag on his shoulder and the folded paper diagram tucked inside his coat against his chest. Behind him, in a great house on the north side of Ebelstein, a young lady named Iseline Duplain sat alone at a writing desk in a room full of white flowers and read a letter that had just been delivered by a Belmiard courier. Her hands did not shake as she read it. Her mouth thinned. She set the letter down. She looked out of the window at the pale spring sky for a long time. She did not know yet that her sister's tutor had already agreed. She only knew that Alente Belmiard had done something Iseline Duplain had never in her life expected her to do. Alente Belmiard had moved first. Iseline Duplain rose from the desk. She rang for her maid. She said, in a very calm voice, that she required a carriage at the front gate within the hour.